afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I'm Lauren Holcomb. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission. I want to just give a quick welcome and introduce the staff who really will be leading y'all through this little session today. We have Sarone Lockett, who is our General Counsel. I know a lot of you probably have met her already. And then Kristen Easterbrook is our Charter Development Manager. So she works a lot in the trainings and support space in our office. We also might have Michelle Neely, who leads our agency foundation, joining us today. She is going to be a little bit late, and if she can't join us, then we will just cover her content and give you her contact info so that y'all can reach out to her. I think everybody on this call probably knows about the commission, but just in case, I'll give you the very high level. The commission is Georgia's statewide charter school authorizer, independent authorizer. So we are a state level agency. We operate outside of the purview of local boards of education. So folks come to us when they're interested in starting a school and they were either denied by their local board or they want to serve a broad geographic attendance zone. So for instance, we have the 2 virtual schools under our authorization. We have some schools that serve very broad geographic regions. So maybe it doesn't make sense to serve one discrete region because you're in a either a very metro area or very rural area, and you need to pull from a larger attendance zone. We have about 35 schools in our portfolio right now that represent about 38,000 students in the state, and we have about 7 more in the pipeline that are opening up in places throughout the state. We have grown. Probably all know we got established via constitutional referendum a few years ago, and we've continued to grow every year. And really, the purpose of the webinar today is to talk about growth. And our growth is what we hope your growth as well, because we really have reached a point in our agency and in our authorizer space where we want to be more strategic about the type of growth that we see and about how we serve Georgia students. That's what we want to talk to all of you about, and we appreciate you joining us here today. So I've just got a few kind of welcome slides, and then Sarone's going to lead us into the content. Can I hit the thing, or do I need you to move me through? Okay, here we go. All right, so the mission of the State Charter Schools Commission is to improve public education by authorizing high-quality charter schools that provide students with better educational opportunities than they would otherwise receive in traditional districts. So we like to start every presentation, every piece of work that we do, we like to start with this mission because we are truly a mission-driven organization. We, when we say better, we really mean academically better. So our schools are measured on operations, finance, and academics, and there's all different kinds of ways to meet that academic performance threshold. We look at growth, and we equate that equally with proficiency. So we think that there's value in both of those things. We know that a lot of times charter schools are serving students that were not traditionally successful in their existing school options, and we want to give equal weight to that. If you're moving that child further, they came in at a 1st grade reading level into 3rd grade, but you moved them up a whole grade level, we think that that's just as important as getting them on grade level if they already came in pretty close to that. So there's different ways for us to measure high quality is really what I'm getting at. So we have all different types of schools. There's not just one type of school that we're looking to see, not one type of academic program, but we really want to see high quality schools in our portfolio. Kristen, can we go to the next slide? So recently, we've been a mission-led organization for a long time, and we recently adopted a vision, and our commissioners and our staff are very passionate about this vision as well, because like I said, we have reached a point where we really want to be strategic in the type of growth that we see from our schools and other types of schools around the state. The vision that our board adopted is innovative and superior charter schools advancing education in every community, and this is really why we're here today, to talk about replication and expansion. With this vision, we took a hard look at, where do we want to go? How do we get there? And we think replication and expansion is the way that we achieve this vision. And so we want to encourage all of you to think very critically about how you want to play. We about the portfolio and charter schools in Georgia. Overall, we do a really good job of students. And there's a lot of choices in Atlanta. Atlanta definitely has a need. We serve a lot of elementary school and a lot of middle school students in Atlanta, and we, just being very forthright, have not done as great of a job of serving students outside of the Atlanta area. And we think
Lauren, I think your audio might be going in and out.
uh-oh. Can y'all hear me okay? Do I need to repeat everything? Can you tell me the last thing you heard, Kristen?
The last thing we heard was we have not done as great a job, and then it kind of went out. That was the last sentence I heard, Lauren, excuse me.
Okay, well, I will just repeat it. So we, the charter school community in Georgia, have done a great job of serving students in Atlanta. But what we have not done as great a job of as we should is serving students outside of the Atlanta area. And we think that partnership with all of you will help us do a better job of realizing this vision, which is, serving students in every community. So that's what we want to talk to you about today with replication and expansion. So there's a few things that we have done at the commission level to kind of encourage our highly effective schools to consider replication and expansion. The staff will go into more detail about this, but I'm going to kind of preview it for you right here. So we've already had in place for a long time a replication and expansion process. And that is an expedited timeline and application to help our highly effective schools go through the process more quickly. And that's a national best practice. So if you have a school that already has a track record and they're interested in scaling or growing, it does not make sense for that school to have to go through the entire startup petition process. So that's why we established this replication and expansion process, which is basically an abbreviated petition cycle. So we've already got that in place. We recently adopted a replication and expansion policy, which is also a national best practice. And this is to make it clear kind of the who. So who is eligible to replicate, because we want to see a positive track record. We want to see that you're stable. So we'll talk more about that, the kind of who piece of it. We just also adopted petition priorities, which is kind of the where piece of where we're interested in schools growing. Like I said, we do a great job of serving students in the Atlanta area. We need to do a much better job of serving students outside of Atlanta. And we know that a lot of you are interested in doing that. So we'll talk more about those priorities. And then upcoming, which is another thing we want to preview with you, we're working on support to help flesh out kind of more of this how piece of how do schools scale, how do schools replicate. So if you're interested in potentially growing your grade levels, what's the best way to do that? If you're interested in establishing a new site, we'll talk about some support available to you to help you do that. And then we've also got some grant applications in the work that would provide funding incentives to help do this as well, because we know that that's an important piece. And then lastly, we want to hear from you today too. And I know that you may not have an answer today, so this can be an ongoing conversation, but as you think about your plans potentially for scaling and growing, we want to know, what are the barriers that you see that maybe we haven't thought of, and how can we help mitigate those barriers to help support your efforts? So I'm going to pass it off to Saron now to kind of go through the meat of this, and we have the chat box open so folks can ask questions, and we will answer throughout, and we will definitely save time at the end for questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kristen, will you just give me a mic check, make sure you can hear me okay?
You're good.
Perfect. All right. So as Lauren said, this isn't, our new policy is not something we just kind of came up with. We modeled the policy after nationally normed best practices. In addition, we did some extra due diligence just to try to make sure that we were following norms and, just had an idea of what practices other similar authorizers were using to facilitate growth for high quality charter schools. So the first thing we'll start out with here is what are the differences between replication and expansion? They are two separate processes, and they can be used by high performing schools to accomplish similar but not identical objectives. So we thought it would be really helpful just to walk through some of the nuances and the definitions of replication and expansion, just to kind of get our heads clear about what we're really talking about here. Depending on the goals of your school, you may want to use one process or the other. Okay, So replication is the creation of a second or subsequent charter school that utilizes the instructional model or academic program of an existing school. So in this case, a charter school that's involved in a replication effort is petitioning to replicate into a separate charter school. And under that separate charter, the charter school operates under a separate charter contract, and that ensures that accountability for performance takes place at the individual school or site level. So in other words, in a replication scenario, the existing or original school operates under one charter contract, while the second or replicating school operates under another contract. Under this scenario, multiple schools can operate under a single board as well in kind of a charter network structure, as long as each school in that network holds an individual charter contract. By way of example, if an existing school, School A, that's K through 8, decides to offer or create a feeder pattern, so 2 elementary schools and 2 middle schools feeding into 1 high school, each of those schools could hold individual charter contracts and operate under the authority of a single governing board. Through replication, multiple charter schools can also operate under multiple charter boards, or governing boards, excuse me. In this instance, an existing school and its governing board could partner with a new or separate governing board with the intent of starting a new school that will eventually operate completely independently of the first. We saw this, if you guys kind of follow our approvals, with Atlanta Classical Academy. It was a locally approved charter school out of the Atlanta Public School District. It partnered with a new board, which would eventually become the board of its replicated school, School B, Northwest Classical Academy. And the replication effort was intended to create a new school serving a different region of the state. So that partnership between the two boards involved really providing with the petition a detailed replication agreement that really explained the responsibilities of each board, the timeline for replication, and when that second board, the Northwest Classical Board, or School A, would develop the capacity to operate independently from the original or existing school. And just keep in mind, I mentioned before, charter network essentially is defined as a single organization or governing board that oversees the operation of multiple schools. So there are a lot of different options with replication in terms of the governing board. When you're petitioning, what we're really looking for is to see that there's like a defensible and rational explanation for whatever governance structure you choose. Now, expansion is the growth of an existing school by significantly increasing student enrollment or adding grades. As the name applies, it can be horizontal growth or vertical growth. So you could be adding grades, or you could just be seeking to significantly increase your student enrollment. But essentially, this is going to impact the same community for the most part. Expansion is not facilitated through the petition process. So we have a specific expansion rule, and that it basically explains that expansion occurs through charter amendment, and it identifies the specific information you'll need to include in your request for an amendment. So in an expansion scenario, rather than going through the petition timeline that I'll discuss a little bit later, you will send a written request to the Executive Director, Lauren Holcomb, including all the required information, including grades or classes that you want to add, new enrollment or new grade spans if that's what you're intending to do. And again, as with replication, we want to see the rationale behind the request. There are some other requirements that we ask for in an amendment request, but you can certainly visit our amendment rule to kind of walk through the specifics of that request. To give you just an example of what an expansion might look like, you might be serving K-8, but decide that you want to expand, for example, to serving high school grades. That would be a great, very simple expansion example. But I do want to note, again, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different ways that you can structure your school's growth. It really, really, really is going to depend on what your end goal is. So a same K-8 school that wanted to expand into high school could either request a charter amendment and expand, or it could decide that it wants to keep accountability separate for its existing K-8 school and its high school addition. And so it may want to replicate into a high school program and have that high school be accountable to itself and have its own accountability metrics and own charter contract. So just make sure that you're properly evaluating the nuances of each scenario when you file your petition or your request for expansion. We'll be asking questions just to kind of understand whether you're requesting the right structure and whether that structure is going to meet your needs. A couple of additional things to just keep in mind with replication and expansion is how are you going to ensure the appropriate level of accountability? So for example, if you're in a replication scenario, because you have two separate charter contracts, each school will be accountable for their own CCRPI results as well as your comprehensive performance framework results. So the new charter school is going to receive separate scores in the CCRPI and the CPF based only on the performance of its students. On the other hand, from an accountability perspective, because expansion is not creating a separate charter contract, the expanded grades or additional students added are going to result in only one CCRPI score that includes essentially the new school and the expanded offering. So only one CCRPI score and one CPF accountability score as well. You want to know and understand those nuances as you consider whether you want to replicate or whether you want to expand. Another really important consideration is financials. In the replication scenario, because you're creating a new charter school, the existing school, School A, and the new school, School B, must keep separate financial accounting systems. So while the two schools may choose to share services or otherwise utilize economies of scale, each school is required to track the specific use of its funds, and the schools cannot commingle funds. That is not true for an expansion. In an expansion scenario, again, because you're operating under the same charter contract and you're just expanding students served or grades offered, that single school can choose to include funding from its expansion in a single financial accounting system for both its original and expanded offerings. And last, as I mentioned, in a replication scenario, you'll go through the petition process that we'll discuss soon. In a expansion scenario, you'll be requesting a charter amendment in writing to the executive director. All right. So our new replication and expansion policy, we did this with two goals in mind, and that is one, identifying what the eligibility requirements are. So what is a high quality charter school? And then two, making sure that we could streamline the process for growth or expansion. So in doing that, what we really saw is across the board, there was kind of a recency requirement in terms of the data that we looked at to determine what a high quality charter school would be. So I think we looked at maybe 10 state level local or state level independent charter authorizers, and the overwhelming number of those authorizers were using a 3-year standard. So our policy in determining eligibility is that we will look at your 3 most recent years of data in determining whether or not you meet the eligibility criteria for being a high quality state charter school. Generally speaking, schools in their first charter term are not eligible for replication. However, if a school has met the CPF standards in academics, operations, and finance for 3 consecutive years, that school is then eligible for petitioning for replication or sending it in a written request for expansion. For those schools, for other schools, so if you're not in your first term with a perfect record, we would start looking at your track record once you entered your second term charter term. And so at that point, a school in its second or subsequent charter term is eligible for replication or expansion when its 3 most recent years of data, we discussed that before, shows that the school has met CPF academic standards for 3 consecutive years and CPF standards in operations and finance in the most recent year and at least 1 other year. We are currently developing an FAQ document that will kind of explain how this would play out in a for a school that, for example, has recently transferred to SCSC authorization, or a school that has recently replicated its second school and is seeking to replicate again. Generally speaking, replicated or transfer schools will be considered schools in their second term for purposes of replication and expansion. They'll receive credit for meeting SCSC performance standards across the categories for their first year of data, pretty much based off their ability to replicate or to transfer. And then these schools will have to demonstrate that they have met CPF academic standards for 2 additional years under these performance standards. So for example, showing for the 2 additional years that they have met operations and finance in the year immediately preceding the request. And we will, of course, the asterisk there that you see, if for some reason there's not a meet, but there is a approaching standards, we will consider those applications on a case-by-case basis. Functionally, what this means for those replicated or transferring schools is that data will be available for replication and expansion in your 3rd year of operation. All right. Our board has adopted a couple of other policies, so I'll go over those really quickly as it relates to replication and expansion. So really this is more specific to replication actually. We have adopted a grade band policy that essentially limits our board's ability to approve charter applications that propose partial grade bands. What this ultimately means is that if you petition for, let's just say, to serve grade K through 3, and our board determines that you've got a high quality petition and that we're ready to authorize your school, our board is not authorized to enter a charter agreement for K through 3. It can, however, authorize you to operate a school in grades K through 5, so that complete charter band. You still can serve grades K through 3 if that's consistent with your enrollment plan. So keep that in mind. Nothing about the grade band policy constrains you from serving partial grade bands. It does, on the other hand, limit our board from approving petitions for partial grade bands. They can approve your petition for a full grade band, and again, you can choose to serve just a part of that grade band if that's consistent with your pedagogy or whatever enrollment plan you're proposing. All right.
Let me I've heard we've had some information about this. The reason that our board adopted this policy is because when we first got started, we did authorize partial grade bands. So for example, we may have authorized a school that was K6 or K7, and then the school would come back later and ask for the 8th grade expansion, and the data was not there to justify the grade expansion. And our board made a decision that they did not want to be in that position again. So on the front end, we're going to only authorize full grade bands. And when we give an expansion, we want to go ahead and feel good about giving the expansion for the full grade band because we feel like that's in the best interest of students. And again, as Saran said, it does not constrain schools from executing on a partial grade band within the grades that they're authorized to serve. If that's in your school design, that is completely fine. We just don't want to come on the back end later and have schools that have students in schools that are in the middle of a partial grade band and not be able to matriculate through their school in accordance with the school's design because of a lack of performance.
That's an excellent point. I did say this was specific to replication, but I guess I was thinking as the policy was, if the policy had been implemented, we wouldn't really have had that. But yes, so this definitely would apply to expansion in that way as well. Thank you, Lauren. Very, very, very good point. I appreciate the catch there. So we'll walk through again just the petition process. If you attended the petitioner boot camp, you saw this. We also presented this calendar during our meeting. We will open our petition portal and start accepting replication applications beginning November 1st through July 15th. We'll consider those on a rolling basis. And the petition cycle will close on December 30th. Again, if you're requesting an expansion, that's just done through an amendment request. So there's not a specific timeline for requesting an expansion. I'll roll through a couple of things that we always hit when we do petitioner boot camp, because replication petitions are still petitions. So all of the legal requirements that apply to a startup petition would equally apply to replication petitions. So I just want to make sure that that stays at the forefront. We have had a couple of scenarios where a school has not met some of the local submission requirements. And so we have to kind of, because of the rolling timeline, depending on your attendance zone, it's not, a critical error, but we have to go back and kind of remind folks, hey, remember, you have a statewide attendance zone, but you really need to notify the local Board of Education of your replication. So I'll walk through those really quick just to make sure you guys are keeping that at top of mind. So your attendance zone matters. So when you're thinking about replication, you can select either a statewide attendance zone or a defined attendance zone. Attendance zone simply means all or a portion of a local school system, one or more local school systems, or portions of school systems, or even like you can even segregate it down into zip codes and things like that. So portions of even smaller school districts and segments. If you have an attendance zone that includes all local school systems in the state, then you're considered to have a statewide attendance zone. Anything short of that is considered a defined attendance zone. If you have a statewide attendance zone, you are required to submit a petition at the same time that you submit your replication petition to the SCSC to the local Board of Education in the jurisdiction in which your school is proposed to be located. Again, with the statewide attendance zone, the local board does not have to take any action on that petition, but it does have to be submitted concurrently. The law says concurrently, so that means concurrently. We will ask you to provide documentation that you have submitted your petition at the same time that you've submitted your SCSC replication application. So please be aware of that requirement and plan to do that before you submit to the SCSC. If you have a statewide attendance zone and are only providing virtual instruction, there are no local submission requirements for those sorts of petitions. If you have a defined attendance zone, on the other hand, you actually will have to submit a petition at the same time that you submit the SCSC petition, or, depending on the time frame for the local school district, you will have to submit a petition on that school district time frame. And that school district or Board of Education will have to actually take action on your petition. So let me clean that up a little bit. If you have a defined attendance zone, you must submit an application to the local Board of Education where your school is proposed to be located, and that local Board of Education must take action on your petition. What that means is that you need to submit your petition in accordance with all of the timelines, all of the rules, and all of the requirements of that local Board of Education. The SCSC cannot consider your petition for replication until that local Board of Education has taken action on your petition. And by taking action, we mean either voted to approve the petition, to deny the petition, or failed to act on the petition within the statutory deadline. So please keep that in mind. Because the replication timeline is on a rolling basis, we will have to hold your petition until we get board action. We will go ahead and continue to review your petition. We will schedule interviews, and we will be prepared to present a recommendation. However, we can't put a recommendation before the board until the local Board of Education has taken action. So please be mindful of your attendance zone and all of the legal requirements associated with it in terms of providing notice to the local Board of Education. As a petitioner, it's your responsibility to identify your attendance zone and to make sure that you understand your submission requirements. We will not double check it. We will just check to make sure you've provided appropriate documentation of the submission requirements. You will need to produce your submission documentation with your application. It should show that you've met all of the legal requirements. Again, I mentioned this just a minute ago. If you've applied to a local board and you have a defined attendance zone, still go ahead and submit your petition to us based on our rolling timeline. We'll go ahead and consider the petition. We just won't be able to put it before the board until the local Board of Education takes action. And if you have a statewide attendance zone, submit your applications concurrently. So we should expect to see, for any school with a statewide attendance zone, evidence, maybe that's an email, a certified return mail receipt, something like that, showing that you've submitted your application to the local Board of Education at the same time that you submitted your replication petition to the SDSC. All right. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. The FY22 petition priorities for this cycle only for startup and replication petitions. We are giving priority consideration to applications that propose schools outside of high saturation areas. You'll see here, we've got just a couple of examples. What we did was we did a comprehensive review of charter schools across the state and identified areas in most need of choice options. So this list here, Athens, Clarke County, Macon-Bibb County, Albany, Dougherty County, and so on, is really intended to be illustrative. It's not exhaustive. It's just a couple of the areas we identified as in need of charter options. The next slide really talks about what a high saturation area is. And so we identified that as a geographic location containing more than one charter school that serves grades K through 5 or 6 through 8 within a 3-mile radius. So anything outside of an area that meets this qualification will be given priority consideration. We will still review and accept schools that want to locate in high saturation areas. However, these petitions will be subject to additional scrutiny, including an evaluation of the likelihood that the school will achieve its intended enrollment metrics and remain financially viable if it is approved. These priorities are completely aligned with the vision that Lauren mentioned earlier, which is that we want to make sure that we're providing these high quality options to schools all over the state, not just in one small geographic area. So those schools that are petitioning to replicate in high saturation areas will need to include the following information in their petition. Student enrollment data, waitlist information for any existing charter schools serving the same grade bands within a 3-mile radius of the proposed school location, and pre-enrollment forms that demonstrate a high likelihood that if approved, the school can meet its projected enrollment target. One thing I kind of want to stop on here, because really for anyone who is petitioning for a replication, we really want to see that you've done your due diligence. So if you tell us that one of the reasons that you want to replicate is because you see a high community need in one area, when we ask you questions about that, we expect you to be able to cite specific data showing that the community needs or desires your school to replicate there. So we want to see your due diligence. And that's not, we're not going to scrutinize it additionally. We just want all of the charter applications to very clearly show that there's a plan for operations, that it's thoughtful, well-intentioned, and based on the desire of the community to see school choice there. That's consistent with our obligation really to vet petitions, but it's also just, we want to see that so that we know that we're approving schools or recommending schools for approval that have a high likelihood for success, especially enrolling students, enough students to remain financially viable. The last thing I want to just note, a couple of things before I toss it back to the team, is when you consider the replication and expansion guidance, make sure that you understand that the eligibility requirements are, those just make you eligible to apply for replication or expansion. When you submit a request for expansion or a petition for replication, we're going to be asking you questions about your governance structure. about your enrollment plans, about any due diligence you've done in terms of there being a desire for your school or your program in a certain area. And so we want to see those plans. We want to see that you've been thoughtful about how you're structuring your governing board. We want to see thoughtful planning about what that looks like down the road if, for example, you're replicating and partnering with a new governing board. If the plan is for that new board to work independently in the future, we want to see the timeline for that and that there's been a thought process about or behind how long it will take to bring the new board up to speed. If you are going to be sharing funds in a replication scenario between one, or sharing staff, for example, between a replicated school and an existing school, we want to see some agreement to make sure that there's a clear segregation of funds that explicitly kind of identifies the duties and roles of the staff that are going to be shared. So we really do need to see a plan for operations. We know you've got the academics. We would know that you've got a handle on the finances, but the one piece we're really looking at is those LEA obligations, the governance structure of the school, and your ability to really scale up in the way that you want to scale up. So if you don't have a plan and you can't really answer those specific questions about how you're going to structure everything from your governing board all the way down to school level staff, take a second look and make sure that you're really building out and presenting a comprehensive plan, and that you can put your best foot forward once we start to review your applications. That is all I have. I will kick it back to Kristen for the next piece. Oh, I do see there's a question. Kristen, do you want me to go ahead and answer that?
Yeah,
or do you
go
want
ahead.
to
Go ahead real quick.
Okay.
While they're fresh.
Okay. Can a replication partner with a district charter school? Could it have a K-8 program and then have a path to move into the district high school? Let me see. That is a nuanced question. I will say what I'll do is I'll respond to this question offline. It's a very specific scenario. However, we have just passed the legislature just passed new standards for what a governing board can look like and who can be on it, that are could be implicated depending on the exact structure of a partnership with a district charter school. It kind of depends who's on that board. So if you don't mind, Mr. Tucker, I will circle back. I may have some follow-up questions so that I can give you a real clear answer on that.
One part of the question I think we could answer now, Sharon, maybe, is, and it might be helpful for other folks too, to think about feeder patterns between schools. And I'm trying to remember, I know we've gone through this exercise before with district to statewide attendance zone schools. I guess it depends on what the attendance zone is, right? Like you can't guarantee admission from one school, from one charter school to another charter school. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so if you have a statewide attendance, obviously, if you have a district charter school, a locally approved charter school is going to have a district-wide attendance zone. It's only going to be enrolling students from that school district. So if you have a statewide charter middle school, for example, you can't guarantee that a student outside of your locally approved attendance zone will be granted the ability to attend a locally approved charter school. And again, that consideration is based on like locally approved charter schools are still getting local dollars from that local school district. And so then you're talking about kind of moving funds from a local, supporting a student outside of a locally charter school district with local funds from inside the district. So that's why I kind of wanted to kind of make sure exactly what the scenario was. But in that scenario, you wouldn't be able to guarantee, for example, a student who's attending in a statewide attendance zone to attend a locally approved charter school if they're not also zoned for that particular county or local board of education. But also I'm happy to answer follow-up. There may be a specific scenario you're thinking about, and probably have a couple of extra questions to make sure I can give you an exact answer, but Lauren's exactly right in terms of that particular piece.
There's one more. Can you see it?
Let's see, I think I saw 2 pop up. So let me go down here. That was Mr. Tucker's. Okay, so the next one is for grade expansion requests. If your charter currently has a zoned attendance, APS in Fulton, could you request a statewide attendance and an expansion request? That depends on your request. So this kind of has come up we recently approved, so that depends on your request, but also I think what would need to happen in this situation is, this is the scenario where, for example, you have a K-8 school that wants to expand to high school, and they could do that either through an expansion or through a replication. So in that scenario, you could replicate into high school bands, and your high school have a statewide attendance zone, but your middle school have a defined attendance zone. You would need to choose to replicate in that scenario rather than expand. And so in that scenario, you could make that work, but you'd have to do it through an expansion. But if you made a grade expansion request, you might want to also, since that's an amendment to the charter, you might want to seek an amendment that would help to cover a statewide attendance zone, and that may help to kind of address that concern. We have, anytime that you want to request a charter amendment, you can, and if you decide that expansion would be the time to try to extend your attendance zone, you could certainly do it at that time. For a grade expansion request, those can be made by schools at the end of their 3rd year of operation or within their 3rd year of operation. So you need to have 3 years of data. So for a school in its 2nd year, 2nd term, I'm assuming, you would need to have 1, 2, 3. So that would be in your 4th year of operations, you would have 3 years of CPS data for an existing state charter school. So it really is based on when the data is available, not the years that you've been in operation. The criteria are based off of CPS results. So for an existing state charter school, we would need to see those CPS results. Okay. I do have, okay. Confirming that there is no application or documentation needed with the local school district. That is correct for an expansion request. Because it is not a petition, it's just a request to the executive director to expand. Okay, schools in their 3rd year with all 3 years existing within COVID, how will academic data be accounted for in the 1st term charter expansion request? We have ways of looking at data, and we're figuring that out now. So we will get back to you on that, but we're taking a harder look at how we can evaluate the performance, and we'd really just look at the data that's available. That's honestly a better question for Katie Mancy, and so what I will do is take a copy of that and kind of talk through that with her, and then see if we can get you a more concrete answer. But very generally, it would be, we would kind of look into the available data that the school had for that year. Okay. I think that's all of them. Okay, I think I got them all. Kristen, double check me if I'm wrong.
I believe so.
Okay.
All right, pass it over to Michelle.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Michelle Neely from the State Charter Schools Foundation, And we know that one of the biggest challenges you have in replicating or expanding may be the need for technical support or funding. You may have a great vision, you may have the desire, you may have the right educational model, but it may be a barrier with the funding and technical support. So that is something that the foundation is considering, and we are looking for partners and ways to support you with your efforts to to replicate and expand. One possibility that we hope will come to fruition is that the SCSF, in conjunction with the SCSC and the Georgia Charter Schools Association, have submitted a grant application to the state of Georgia using some federal funds that they have available for something called the Georgia Strategic Charter Growth Initiative. And through this initiative, if we receive the funding, we will be able to provide technical support, technical assistance, mentorship programs, leadership development, and grants for schools. So stay tuned on that. We were hoping that we would have some updates by now, but it appears that the decisions will not be made until January. So we appreciate your patience. We will let you know as soon as we have information on that, but that may be a way that we can support you, and that is certainly our goal. And if we don't receive this funding, we will be pursuing other funding sources. Outside of that, there are some external funders who provide support to schools seeking to replicate and expand. One of your best sources right now is going to be the Charter Growth Fund. And if you get this document, which I believe they will be sending out the presentation, and I can also follow up with links. This is linked in the document. And they offer several $100,000 in some of our schools. I believe Du Bois Integrity Academy was one of the ones who has received funding through the Charter Growth Fund and others. And they are specifically prioritizing the Southeast. So now is a good time to look into the programs that they have to offer, and if there is a way for you to secure that funding. They're also prioritizing school leaders of color, because it does include a component for the school leader to be part of a cohort program to receive training and support for the replication and expansion. One of the things that is challenging that we have noted is that most of the funding for forming new charter schools, establishing new charter schools, or expanding or replicating existing charter schools is that the funds have really been designated for the city of Atlanta. But I want you to take heart. That is something that all of us are talking about, and we're trying to communicate that with funders, that there is a need across our state. And we're hoping that with the SCSC's new priorities for charter growth, that will help prompt the philanthropic community to follow suit and expand their funding, their geographic areas for potential funding. So I will continue to look for additional sources of funding and support, and we'll send those out to you in my regular emails and put them on our Slack site. There's also technical assistance available. As you know, webinars like this from the SCSC are very helpful, and they offer different training opportunities. So please, make sure that you're staying aware of all of those chances to learn more and to receive support. But also, of course, don't forget our friends at the Georgia Charter Schools Association. They do provide support for replication and expansion and help you put together petitions. Their incubator program offers different services. In addition, the new, or fairly new now, Facility Resource Center provides support for buildings and building finance and things like that. So I would definitely look to them if you need assistance in any of those areas, because they have a wealth of resources and can provide you with a lot of assistance. In addition, BES, it used to be known as Building Excellent Schools. They offer some training and technical assistance programs for schools, and they have fellowship programs as well. So if you'd like to help get connected to VES, then let me know. The foundation will be working with them as well to look for some joint funding opportunities to support you. You are more than welcome to reach out to me and request a meeting to discuss ideas for funding and support. If I know which schools are specifically looking, that will help me target my search for funding and support. So if it's a specific model or a specific community, then I might be able to help guide you. And we are always on the lookout for ways to help you in these efforts. Kristen, this is all I have to offer here. Please let me know. I can't see the questions, but let me know if there are any.
I'm not seeing any new ones roll in, but folks feel free to add them to the chat, and I'd be happy to read them for you, Michelle.
And, and again, everyone knows how to find me. Just reach out anytime, and I'm happy to help you talk it through and think through the, the implications of your decisions about the future for your school.
Perfect. Thanks, Michelle. And I will jump right in here to talk about what we are kind of considering our backup plan in the event that we are not able to be funded through that grant program, to be able to provide some of those really robust supports around replication and expansion. So we are also exploring other possible supports that we could roll out to encourage schools to replicate and expand, as particularly in some of these target areas that we have identified. And one of the ways that we're really considering doing this is through what we are kind of imagining as almost a replication and expansion cohort program, where we are hoping to create a space for schools to work with a consultant or a team to develop a multi-year strategic plan with a specific focus on growth. So helping you think through some of the particular issues that are that might be for you as a school. Some areas we have seen some of this focus particularly come up is around your leadership and governance structure. So what does that look like for you and your model as you grow over the next 5, 10 plus years? The financial models that you would want to implement for the school, as well as some considerations around how you structure your staff. There are some areas where we have oftentimes seen schools struggle with the actual operational design of the program and want some support. And as we saw with some of the questions during Søren's presentation, there are a lot of legal parameters around what can and can't be done depending on your specific situation. And so we want to really provide a space where schools can get that really targeted, specific technical assistance to begin to design their plan moving forward. So wanting to create a space where you have support to begin thinking through this development and what are all the pieces that are going to need to be in place before you're even ready to apply, because we know that there's a long design process that goes into this and to doing it well. And so we want to create a space for that and for you all to answer or ask questions and get some really targeted feedback on the best way to move your school forward. And as always, too, if you have other thoughts on barriers to your replication or expansion efforts, if there's just something that you're like, if I could get this figured out, I would love to start at a school in a high need area, please let us know. Those are things that, we are trying to design these programs and supports and technical assistance opportunities for you all. And we're doing that based on anecdotal stories that we've had with schools who've gone through this effort or who have expressed interest. And so that's kind of our starting place. But as we kind of launch this and hopefully grow this method of growth for charter schools around the state, we want to make sure that we're hearing from people who are candidates who might have some other areas that they want us to help them troubleshoot in. So feel free to reach out, and we would love to hear from you on this. And with that, I think we are going to open the floor back up for questions for anyone. If you have questions about the support, anything that you've heard today, please go ahead and type them in the chat box.
Want to ask a question, let them raise their hand and we can unmute. Is that might be quicker?
Yeah, absolutely.
Either way. So if you have a question, we've got a few minutes left. I know folks might need to go at 3, but if you will hang out for a few minutes, if you want to ask a question, either raise your hand and Kristen will unmute you or type it in to the chat box. Or if you just have a thought to share, you know, a barrier maybe that we haven't thought of that we can address, we definitely want to hear from all.
I might also just piggyback on that. If there are, if some of those barriers that we listed or talked about are not barriers, then we are moving in maybe a different direction than what you think we should, maybe also say that too. We would love to hear from you on any of that. All right, we've got a question. How much do priority areas impact expansion decisions? I.e., are you less likely to be granted an expansion if you're in a saturated area?
No, I wouldn't say that. Especially if you, I think, is that question from Emily at Ethos?
Yes, it is.
If you're talking about a grade level expansion for your existing population, that is not a barrier. I mean, really the concern, if you think about it from kind of the high level lens, the concern around the saturation areas is, I mean, one, we want to make sure, of course, that we're serving all types of students and not just students that are located in one area. But what we're seeing is that some of our schools in these high saturation areas don't have a pipeline or an ability to meet their enrollment target. And that's hurting them. It's hurting their ability to be successful. And then when we keep locating more schools in those areas, it's hurting our existing schools' ability to be successful. So, I mean, for a school that already is, let's just call it a K-5 school that's already in an area and wants to expand to grades 6 through 8, I mean, you're in a much better position than a startup school that's coming into that space because you've already got your pipeline, right? What we are looking for is more information about how you're going to guarantee that there's demand from your community, that you're going to be able to get the students that you think you're going to get. So, I mean, you're in a much better position if you're already an existing school looking to just kind of grow your grades. Now, if you were talking about adding another site, I do want to differentiate there. So if you were, you know, a K-5 school in an area and you wanted to add another K-5 site down the street, I mean, I would assume that you're doing that because you have such demand and you can't meet it in your current building, but that would probably be one that we would, you know, have some more questions about. But yeah, I mean, I'm assuming grade level expansion is what you're thinking about, Emily. Okay, well, we're at 3 o'clock. I know folks probably need to go, but I can stay for a few more minutes. I don't know if the rest of the staff can, but happy to answer questions or just hear thoughts that people have. And we will definitely be in touch as we learn more. We're very hopeful that we'll get this grant and be able to put some funding in addition to the technical assistance. But like Kristen said, we've got a backup plan. If funding does not come, we can still do some technical support at the commission level, and that would be for existing state charter schools and locally approved schools as well, not just restricted to state charter schools. But thank y'all for being here and what you do for students. Kristen, I think Corliss has a question. Can we unmute him? It's not working for me.
Yes.
Oh, it says you're self-muted, Corliss. If you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I just had a quick question about the grade band. I knew y'all said that we had to do, there was a grade band for, like, so if I wanted to do a K-5 school, right? With an existing school, we would be within the rights to just do 5th grade if we had a K-5 school. If we wanted to grow the school backwards, we just wouldn't be able to do it 1 grade at a time as for the petition purposes, right?
Yeah, so we would, as an existing school, we would want to go ahead and get a plan from you and information from you basically to authorize the entire grade band. But if you wanted to serve a subset of grades, so like 5th grade or 4th and 5th grade, that is totally fine. We want you to design a school the way that you want. We just don't want to constrict you to where, I mean, it's primarily for matriculation reasons, but we don't want to have on the other end, like, this is not your situation, but we are trying to prevent a situation where we have authorized a school to serve 6th grade, but we're not prepared to authorize them to serve 7th and 8th grade. And then we set students up to where they can't continue matriculating through the school. So the policy is basically to prevent that from happening, not to prevent you from serving whatever grade levels you wanted to, as long as that was justified and part of a plan.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure. I don't see any more questions. Kristen, do you?
I do not.
Okay. All right. Well, we can probably safely conclude.